Welcome to Putting It Into Practice, Katey Schultz's blog, and today I'm celebrating a writer who I greatly admire and someone who I'm lucky enough to call a friend, Patty Ann McNair. Hi, Patty.
Hi, Katie.
Your second book is out, and these are the good times. Perfectly titled. Now that I've just read to the very last chapter this morning. And just tell us, for those who don't know your work, tell us where you are today. What city you're in, what the background is there.
Right. I'm a Chicago girl. I live in the city. I live in a neighborhood called Edgewater, which is just about 2 miles from where I was born at Edgewater Hospital, where Hillary Clinton, some of you may know her, she was also born at Edgewater Hospital. It's now defunct. I'm across from the lake. I look out my window here and I can see Lake Michigan. So I know probably a lot of your friends and the people you work with are Michiganders, so I could probably see them from here. I teach at Columbia College Chicago, and I'm a fiction writer and a nonfiction writer.
Yeah, awesome. And your first book is a collection of short stories, The Temple of Air, multi-award winning. And this is your second book, and it's all nonfiction, and it's published by Side Street Press. So it can be ordered anywhere, local indies, anywhere online, and also directly from the publisher.
Correct.
So we have about 20 minutes together today or so, and I've got your questions pulled up here. So I'm just going to dive right in, and we'll see if we want to veer. We absolutely can.
Okay.
The subtitle of your book is A Chicago Gal Riffs on Death, Sex, Life, Dancing, Writing, Wonder, Loneliness, Place, Family, Faith, Coffee, and the FBI, among other things. So I'm really intrigued by the riff part of that subtitle. So I know from hearing you present and read that a lot of these chapters began as journal entries or as blog posts or guest articles, or even just like a shimmer of like an anecdote that sort of came down and didn't leave you alone. And I think a lot of people write that way. What I'm curious about is like how that label riff, even if it came after, might have given you creative permission and freedom in a way that really worked to bring the collection together as a whole. And the sub question is, how is a riff different from personal essay?
Okay. First of all, I'm really glad that you picked up on the riffs. For whatever reason, people, maybe because the other things are more evocative, like sex and loneliness and wonder, they kind of gloss over that idea of riffs, because to me, it really is like a series of riffs, these pieces. I feel, you have to call it a collection of essays because they need you to label something. But to me, these aren't all really essays, and we can talk a little bit about what I mean by that. They're brief memoirs, like you said. Some of them were just sort of recaptured moments of memory told again. But riff itself, there's a lot of different meanings and common usage, but riff itself, to me, it's a musical sort of thing. And when I think about it, I think about that idea that there's a repetition. And so to me, even though these are about a whole bunch of different things, it's almost scattershot, all the different things, there are repetitions in material and perhaps in theme in a lot of them. A lot of them have to do with who I am as a woman, 43 years after my dad died. A lot of them have to do with facing death in the family. A lot of them have to do with sex. So a lot of them kind of repeat some of the same phrases and some of the same ideas. And to me, that's a riff. But then also that you extend that idea of riff, and it's a solo improvisation, usually sort of based on a repetition. And very much these things work that way for me. I'm just sort of improvising off of an idea. Sometimes they add up to something, very often they add up to something very different from what I had anticipated. And they're also some of them are like 2 pages long, some of them are 20 pages long. And the ones that are longer are almost like riffs within a riff. The one about my grandparents, the missionaries in Korea. There's a bunch of different things. It goes in a bunch of different ways. So to me, it's a slightly different from the personal essay. At least I can't let go of the way that personal essay was taught to me as a high school student and as a college kid early on. that was that there was almost always an epiphany, some realization that you come to. It's a series or a single event from your life that then brings you to sort of a wider understanding of something.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
to me, not all those do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes the understanding, I think, is in the reader more than it is in me. A reader gets to the end and kind of goes, oh, okay, I get that. You know, where in the meanwhile, I'm like, well, I kind of get it, but I don't necessarily. So they're not as neat to me as a personal essay, the way that I remember them might be. I mean, I know that essays now are much looser and much, there's many more paths that one essay can go down than what I thought, you know, the 5-paragraph essay and all of that. But I think that, so riff to me, it's like, okay, this is a brief memoir, it's a recaptured memory, it's a short re-rendering, it's a real personal essay, a solid personal essay, it's an exploration, it's an homage, and all those things together kind of make the whole of this book for me.
Yeah, that's really well put. And the riffs, I'm so glad you mentioned music, because to me, the scene that I can't let go of, that sort of hovers like in the background of everything, is the jukebox, dancing in front of the jukebox part. And that, I mean, that's obviously so musical. So that there's something so pure about that moment of you dancing and your father sort of looking on, sort of doing his thing, but just creating this safe space, even in a potentially precarious situation, depending on how you look at it. That seems almost like a package or a metaphor for everything you're describing would almost fit into that.
Yeah, you know, that was the very first essay memoir, brief memoir that I ever wrote. And I actually started to, I don't even remember exactly why, but, you know, the way that our friendship started, the shared friends that we have, like Anne-Marie Oman and everything. One of her friends, Mike Steinberg, and I think you probably met Mike Steinberg, had come to speak to my class at Columbia after I'd met him when I was teaching at Stone Coast with Anne-Marie. And he started to talk about something, and it was one of those light bulbs that sometimes happens when you're listening to a writer, where you kind of like, oh, this is the start of something. And I started to write it down then in the 90s, you know. And it probably took a couple of years to get it down the way that I wanted it to get down. But maybe because it was the first that I ever wrote, it influences kind of everything that I write. It was, you know, I don't know if that's true for everybody, but for me, often I don't stray too far from what I learned. I learn more, but I still have kind of this foundation from what I first learned. And so maybe that's carrying through.
Yeah, that's so cool. I feel like somehow, I didn't know that about you, but somehow I feel like they were all, you know, if that was the center of the wheel, and they were all spokes off of that. So whatever magic you worked there, I feel like it was really effective.
Good.
So our second question actually is a mystery question. I'm going to click over to Facebook really quick, and several of my private students had some questions they put up. They're all really good, but I'm going to go with this one. This particular writer is curious about your use of recurrent questions and essays to the reader and to you, McNair writer, yourself. So this person found that really engaging, and she wants to know if circling back and repetition of that technique and the posing of the question was deliberate. To her, it feels like a mosaic. She writes, I'm thinking of lines from Finding My Father in the FBI, how things become true, the retelling of things over and over, fact or fiction makes them more solid or permanent. So there's a lot there, but it's all centered around this craft technique that she picked up on, and I wonder what you might have to say about it.
I think that some of that goes back to what we were talking about in the first place, that idea of riffing off of something. So a lot of these, I mean, my essays, almost always start with some image or something that I've seen, or and then out of that image comes a question like, why is that like that? Why does that happen? The one about us on the sidewalk, the coyote in the sidewalk, you know, that when we saw that coyote or whatever the thing was, you know, I kept kind of coming like, why is that thing here? And what is it trying to tell me that it's here? So often it'll start with an image, but then the question about like, why is that image taking my attention, or why does this thing that happened keep coming back to me? That'll often be repeated in my journal as I'm doing it, and then I have to, when I finally decide it might become a real piece, then I have to sort of say, do I want to keep using that, or do I want to let go of some of that, or does it open up to another question? To me, so much of this is about questioning, you know, essays and riffs and everything is about questioning things, not really coming to answers, but questioning things. And so it kind of propels it a little bit for me too. It gives it that sense of propulsion. And then in some cases, like the Finding My Father in the FBI, I mean, I really was looking for that FBI file. And I don't know, it's got to be in one of the boxes I've moved, because I know I wouldn't have thrown it away. So I've seen it since I lost it. But I kept sort of like, for a few days, I would write it in my journal. It would be the way I sort of opened the journal entry up, like, where did that file go? And so, you know, it is it's sort of like the repeated phrase again in riffs and in music, you know, it's like that thing that kind of pushes it forward and pushes it forward. But it also reminds me of when I read, years ago, when I read Crime and Punishment, and Dostoevsky would do stuff that probably none of us could get away with now, you know, like he would take forever to get to something, which I often do as well. But he would circle around a scene, and then he would pick up some more, and then he would circle back again, and he would pick up some more, and he would circle back again and pick up some more. And I really like that. I really find that technique interesting too, where you kind of circle, okay, now what do I get? Let me say it again, and now what's the answer I get? Plus, you know, like things in interrogation. I mean, I've watched enough crime shows and Law and Order to know this, that, you know, you keep asking the same question until the answer becomes more true. And so to some extent, it's kind of an interrogation that way for me as well.
So how do you know when to stop?
Oftentimes the way is reading it out loud, or getting ready to read it out loud to an audience. And if I'm reading it out loud and I hit that again and it feels tedious, that's how I know that, okay, I got to pull that out. And, you know, other than, you know, it's just through the revision, sort of like I haven't come up with enough. There's more question than answer here. And so I have to sort of pull some of that back out. Yeah. And I always get it right, I'm sure, you know.
That's so great too. And that really syncs up with what you were saying earlier with riffs and music, because, you know, returning to a musical theme, but like in jazz and Hello Chicago, you know, you do return to that theme, but what makes it, you know, worth hearing that same song over and over again is actually how you riff off the theme. So how you make it your own. So I see you doing that in writing, which is so cool.
It's so much about sound too.
Oh yeah. I don't know if there's anything available on YouTube of you reading out loud, but if there is, I hope you'll tell us, because those listeners who haven't gotten to hear you read in person, I think it would be a compliment to this conversation if they could hear you reading. Is there anything online yet, audio?
Well, there are those 2 little trailers that Philip did from this, but they're very brief. And then also, there's an essay in there that's about Michigan, return trip that I read at Second Story for Story Week some years ago, and I think they recorded it. I think that's available.
Yep. Okay, so Google that, and that is a really powerful essay too. I would love to hear that one again. So let's move on to my signature question that I love and get to ask every writer, is to share a tiny moment or like a flash nonfiction from your life, you know, from yesterday, from when you were 5, from whatever, something where that there was a click or something turned on a dime and you had a distinct before and after experience? What comes to mind?
I've been thinking about this a lot, but one that came up right away when you let me know that this was a question you were going to ask me, and then I thought, what am I doing with that? But I'm just going to go with it. It was 1999. I was married to my first husband. I was getting ready to go to work. It was a weekday, and for some reason I had to look in his closet for something. And when I opened his closet, there was this small black bag, and I had no idea what it was. And I pulled it out. Of course, I probably shouldn't have done this, but there it was. And it turned out it was a handgun. And it turned out that he had a couple of handguns. And I did not know this. And he knew how I felt about guns. And it just, it was one of those things, when you have like real fear in a moment, how you kind of just go cold toe to head and all of this. So that was my immediate response. And he had been, and the before of this was that he was kind of like a wannabe survivalist. We lived in the city, but he kind of wanted to have a different life. He was a wannabe Buddhist. He was really into nature. He loved cats and animals and all this sort of stuff. But he also really believed that Y2K was going to take over the world. So we had, it's almost embarrassing to say now, but we had big 5-gallon jugs of water on the tops of all of our cabinets in our kitchen and in our pantry. We lived in the city. We lived like around the corner from a white hen. Not that that would be enough to protect us necessarily, but we had 55-gallon drums of water in the basement in our storage. And up to that point, I felt that this was kind of a charming, weird thing about him. Mm-hmm. And then when I found these guns, I thought, oh, no, he really has, like when he jokes around and smiles and talks about, a new world order and all of that kind of stuff, he really means it. And I really didn't. I always thought that I was, I thought that I was tolerant. I thought that I was like, okay, this is his sort of charming weirdness. Just because I don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not good. And so, but then it was like, he's not exactly who I think he is. He probably never was exactly who I thought he was, but we both pretended that he was. And by the same token, I was probably not exactly who he thought I was. And that was hard for me to believe, that I hadn't presented myself, in a way that would let him know that this would not be okay, So it was then that I kind of thought, okay, this might not really work. There were many times when we sort of thought that or had different opinions, a lot of things that were different, but it was then that I thought, he really is very, very different from me. And, and of course I didn't get divorced for another year and a half or so, but, and there were other things to it, but I think it was then that I just sort of thought, I'm not just understanding when I don't really pay attention to this, or when I don't really, worry about this, I'm kind of complicit. And I didn't want to be complicit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that certainly is an example of something turning on a dime. That just innocently, whatever, crouching down to grab something, and then that moment of turning away from the closet and closing the door, hello metaphor.
Right.
I can see that too.
I had to confront him too, which wasn't something that we were very good at. We didn't confront each other very often. So
there was also the implication of your next action.
Whew.
Thank you. That is memorable indeed. Okay, so to finish up, I always like to ask to end by celebrating another author. So I've been celebrating you all month and loving this book. And I will continue to do that, but I also want to pay it forward and hear about like 1 or 2 books that you've read recently. It doesn't matter when it was published, that just like rocked your world. You thought that person is like doing it.
Right. Well, I'm glad you said 1 or 2, because there are 2, and I was going back and forth like this one or this one.
Yeah, it's impossible.
But because they're kind of this, well, there's reasons why I think of them both at the same time. And the one that if I had to say just one is a book called Code of the West, and it's a short story collection by Sahar Mustafa. And Sahar is a Palestinian American, and she was my thesis student some years ago. And so this collection of short stories, many of them were part of her thesis. So that wows me, and I think that's great. What wows me even more, though, is how much better they are even now, after she graduated and she got to spend more time and rework and think about them as a whole and put them all together, and just how really, really powerful they are. We always knew she was a powerful writer. We always, when we accepted her into the program, and even when her book came out, a bunch of us are like, oh, she wrote that one in my class. Oh, she started that one in my class. We're trying to claim them as ours. But she has gone on to make this book something that's just remarkable, that makes us look at ourselves in terms of faced with the Muslim American experience and the Palestinian American experience. It also gives us some sight of things on the other side of the world. So that's interesting as well. But they're each so tight and just so lovely in the way that they're written. So that's one of them, and it just came out. We've done a couple readings together. But another one that came out at the beginning of August is Megan Stielstra, and that's the author's name, and the book is called The Wrong Way to Save Your Life, and it's a collection of essays.
Oh, good title.
Yeah, and she too was a student of mine, which was, again, that's remarkable when you see. She was an undergrad student of mine, and she was a grad student. But she's gone on to do remarkable things. She does opinions sometimes for the New York Times. Her husband is Christopher Jobson, who's the guy who is the founder of that really big art blog thing. You would know it if I said it, but I can't remember. He was just named in Beyonce's biography.
Huh. Creative Capital Arts?
No, I'll think of it. Colossal. He's the guy who invented Colossal. And he was a student of mine too. But Megan's book it's about fear. When she first wrote it, the first working title was Come Here, Fear. And then she, for whatever reason, she kind of pushed on. And this is actually a blog post or a comment that somebody had put in relation to her New York Times opinion article. Said, well, that's the wrong way to save your life or something. So she thought that was the perfect title. So there's a lot of anger in this and a lot of fear in this, but every single one of these essays ultimately opens up into something quite joyful, which is really, really interesting to me. And they're all over talk about riffs, they're all over the place. So she has one that's sort of of her first 10 years, and she'll just have subtitles 3, 6, 3, 3, 2.
Oh,
6,
wow.
Which are the ages, in these little things. So they each stand on their own, but then as a whole, they kind of come to the same, they answer the same questions too. And it's beautiful. Harper picked it up. It's her third book. Her first one was just an book of short stories. And then her second was a collection of essays by Curbside Splendor. And then one of them was selected one of her essays was selected by Cheryl Strayed for Best American Essays, and then that changed her life right then. So,
wow.
Yeah.
All right, 2 good recommendations. Thank you so much, Patty. It's wonderful to talk with you, and just best of luck. Now that you're freed up from these wonderful riffs, we'll all be waiting to see what you write next.
Rock on! If only I could, turn my attention away from everything else I'm doing to. Well, we all know that, right? So
yeah. Keep it going while the momentum is there. You're doing what you need to do, and we're grateful for it. And we'll read whatever you do next.
Thanks for doing this, and I say hi to River for me.
I will. He's in the background.